Most dentists graduate with student loans. I'm a dentist and I graduated with about $300,000 in student loans. I also currently am running a business where I help dentists buy dental practices. And so I'm dealing with a lot of different dentists and pretty much all of them have student loans. I've seen a lot of student loans. The average dentist right now is graduating with at least $300,000 in student loans. Now keep in mind, some dentists have parents that are able to pay for their education. So the average dentist with student loans is probably going to be even higher than that $300,000. There are some schools like NYU where graduates are graduating with $500,000 to $600,000 in student loans. The problem is the average associate dentist right now is making about $180,000 per year. Keep in mind, student loan payments are not counted by the IRS as a business expense. This means that you have to use post-tax money to pay back your student loans, and it means that that student loan payment that you're making is not going to reduce your taxable income. So let's say you're making $180,000 a year as a dentist. That's going to put you in a fairly high tax bracket. Depending on what state you're in, you might have state income tax. So at $180,000 per year, you might be paying 35% towards taxes. So that means $60,000 towards tax. Now let's say you have $300,000 in student loans and you're on the standard 10-year repayment plan. That's going to leave you with a payment of about $3,400 per month, which is going to end up being about $40,000 a year. So you say, great, I'm making $180,000 as a new dentist graduating out of school, but keep in mind, you're paying $60,000 towards taxes and now you're paying $40,000 towards student loans. That's only leaving you with about $80,000 left over. Now, it's very much going to depend on where in the country you're living, whether you're in a big city or a smaller city. $80,000, you can live a decent quality of life off $80,000, but you're definitely not going to have a lot of extra money for buying a house, saving for retirement. It's not that much money. Also, keep in mind that you went to school for 8 years where you could have gotten a job. If you got a job straight out of high school, you probably could be making $80,000 a year by now. And also you would have been saving money up along the way. I mean, at the very least, you could have gotten a 4-year degree and done something like engineering and be making substantially more than $80,000 a year. But you went to graduate school and you're only left with $80,000 a year. I mean, if you just absolutely love teeth and love seeing patients, maybe that was worth it to you doing all this school, all this training to make $80,000 a year. But the reality is most dentists would like to be making more than that. And you have the opportunity to make a lot more than that. So what then are your options if you have $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 of student loans and you're at a job where you're making $180,000 a year? So first thing to keep in mind is student loans, the situation is changing very rapidly. If you were lucky enough to be around during COVID, student loans were actually on pause for like 3 years and you didn't have to make any payments, you didn't have any interest. And then when Biden came in, he set up the SAVE plan and a bunch of different student loan incentives that have been super helpful with student loans. Now that Trump has taken over, he has already announced that he's going to be undoing some of the things that Biden put in place. And so right now, it's just a very confusing world. I don't have all the answers. No one does, because we don't know exactly what's going to happen with student loans. I'll probably make another video at some time talking about some of the updates. But here, based on where we are right now, what is the best option for paying back your student loans or not paying them back, or what's the best option? So for me personally, I graduated with about $300,000 in student loans. Now, 20,000 of those were in private student loans and 280 were in government student loans. And so as soon as I got out of school, the first $20,000 that I made, for the most part, I used that to pay back those private student loans because those had a higher interest rate and I knew that there were absolutely no government incentives for those. If you have private student loans, that especially if they're high interest rate, you need to get those paid off ASAP. I think my interest rate on those were like 8 or 9%. Like it was a really high number. I got those paid off right away. Now, as far as the government student loans, you have a lot more options. First off, there are options for deferment, meaning you can just not make payments. You just call your servicer and say, hey, I can't afford these payments right now, and it'll be deferred. Next thing you can do is you can use an income-based repayment plan. And basically what that means is they're going to take about 10% of your income, calculate that, and that's going to be your student loan payments. At least that's what they say. But the reality is oftentimes you can get that number to a lot lower than 10% of your income. That 10% number is taken after business expenses. It's taken after retirement investment funds, as long as you're investing into the right type of accounts. There are all sorts of tricks and things you can do to actually bring that number down a lot lower. The number also allows you to deduct a certain amount based on if you have any dependents in your house. The number ends up being a lot lower than 10% for most people. If, for instance, the first year you graduate out of school, the year previous, you might not have had any income because you were in school. You now have a $0 payment. The next year, you were only working for a half, maybe a third of the year because you were in school the first half, and you only have the second half of the year you were working, and it took you a while to get your license and you didn't make as much that first year. You might only have a third of your normal income that first actual year of working. What you can do that second or third year that you're working, you can file for an extension on your taxes, and you don't actually have to file your taxes until something like October of the next year. And then you might not have to recertify your income until a lot later. Like if you recertify your income right before you file your taxes for that extension, you might have another year before you actually have to recertify again. And so if you are smart about how you do this, and if this is the strategy you want to follow, you can basically go the first 3 to 4 years out of school without having to pay anything back on your student loans. Now, the only thing you want to keep in mind with this is that if you are accruing interest on those loans, your principal might actually increase, which means when you do start paying back your student loans, you might have a higher amount to pay back. This is one of those things that we're not yet sure exactly what's going to happen, because Biden, he put out what's called the SAVE plan, in which basically the government covers that interest for you. However, Trump is probably going to undo that, and then we might be back to having to pay that interest. So don't just think that because you're having $0 per month student loan payments that you're not actually accruing interest, because you might be. That's something to check into. All right, so with all that said, if you're a dentist, there's basically a cheat code. While an associate on average is going to make between $180,000 to $200,000 a year, if you are the owner of a practice, you can make on average $150,000 more than if you're working as an associate. The average owner is making about $350,000 per year. So now if instead of making $200,000 a year, you're making $350,000 a year, well, you just pay your student loans off. If you're making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 a year, you might be able to pay your loans off in just 1 to 2 years, and then you're done with them. You don't have to worry about them ever again. So in short, when you first graduate from school, put your loans on some sort of income-based repayment. Pay minimum student loan payments. Pay as little as possible. Obviously, if you legally are required to make payments, you need to make those payments. But try to pay as little as possible as you can on those student loans, because you want to be saving up an emergency fund. When you buy a dental practice, the banks are going to want to see that you have at least $50,000 to $75,000 saved up in the bank. Once you have worked for a year, gotten the experience, saved up that $50,000 to $75,000, buy a practice. Now, if you buy the right practice, you're going to be making $350,000 a year, $450,000 a year. It's going to be easy to start aggressively paying off those student loans. If you have taken out $300,000 to $500,000 in student loans, the only way you're really going to pay those off is if you find a job that pays $300,000 to $500,000 a year. And the best and easiest, most predictable way to achieve that is by becoming the owner of your own practice.